A new HOA president thought she was untouchable until she destroyed the wrong man's bridge. Turns out, he controlled the water that made their neighborhood valuable, and he was done being polite. Royston Hale wasn't a man who raised his voice, never needed to. He spoke with the kind of calm you only earn through years of working in silence, listening more than talking, and watching people show you who they are. At 53, Royston had a reputation in McCalla, Alabama, not flashy, but steady. Folks knew him as the environmental surveyor who always showed up early, always walked the land slow, and never left trash behind. What fewer people knew was that he still lived on the same lakeside property his grandfather bought in 1947, back when the shoreline was wild and nobody cared about view lines or bylaws. That land, 6 acres of uneven brush, pine and black walnut trees, held more than just a house. It held family, history, ghosts, if you believed in that kind of thing. And right through the middle of it ran a narrow inlet of Lake Briar, a curve in the water that split the property in two. Years ago, Royston's grandfather, Charlemont Hale, built a simple bridge out of salvaged oak and railroad nails. Nothing fancy, just enough to get a man across with a wheelbarrow or a fishing pole. Royston grew up crossing that bridge like other kids walked a hallway. When it fell into disrepair in the early 2000s, he didn't hire it out. He rebuilt it himself, plank by plank, coat by coat. Every nail driven was a memory, every sanding stroke a way of saying, "I remember you, Granddad." He didn't put up lights, no railing, no modern design, just a clean span of wood, low and strong, like the man who first laid it down. But that bridge wasn't just sentimental, it was practical. It connected the house to the old tool shed, where Royston kept everything from soil testers to survey maps and hand-drawn sketches of the lake's topography. Without the bridge, he'd have to walk a quarter-mile around the inlet to reach the shed, a time-wasting loop he never liked. Still, he wasn't unreasonable. When the neighborhood began shifting, when bigger homes crept in and people with money started looking for views, Royston didn't protest. He paid his dues to the Briarwood Hills HOA. He trimmed the roadside trees. He even let the new residents walk the edge of his land when they asked politely. But some things weren't negotiable. The bridge was one of them. He thought everyone understood that. Then came the postcard. It arrived folded in half, cheap ink smudging from the rain. HOA annual meeting. New leadership elections. Community enhancement goals. Enforce visual standards. Royston read it twice and placed it under the dish rack. He wasn't much for meetings. Weeks later, a different kind of letter showed up. This one in a stiff white envelope, typed out like it came from a lawyer's office. Your bridge has been found in violation of Article 7, Section C of the HOA Architectural Guidelines. Please remove the structure within 14 days, or further action will be taken. He blinked at the paper, read it again, then laughed, short and breathy, the way you do when something's so absurd you don't even get mad right away. He walked out to the bridge that evening with a cup of coffee and stood in the middle of it. Watched the water roll underneath. A heron stood at the far bank, unmoved. The moon came up slow. He didn't tear anything down, and he didn't reply. That bridge had been there before Briarwood had a name, before the county paved the main road, before some of the neighbors had been born. He wasn't about to justify its existence to a board full of people who'd been there 5 minutes. He figured it would blow over. Maybe a mistake. Maybe the new HOA president trying to make noise. But it didn't blow over. It was just the beginning. But what Royston didn't know, what none of the old-timers knew, was that the new HOA president had no interest in tradition and no patience for unregulated eyesores. Corliss Pendry didn't waste time making introductions. On her second day as president of the Briarwood Hills HOA, she sent out a 9-page PDF labeled Neighborhood Aesthetic Reassessment Guidelines. It hit inboxes at 6:12 a.m. sharp. Her tone wasn't aggressive, just clinical. She spoke in legal phrases and carried herself like she was running a gated community in Boca Raton, not a lakeside neighborhood in Jefferson County, with cracked sidewalks and a mix of retirees, school teachers, and holdouts like Royston. But she didn't see history. She saw inefficiency. Corliss had moved to Briarwood Hills barely 8 months earlier from Scottsdale, Arizona. Word around town was she used to work in real estate. Some said luxury property staging, others said HOA legal compliance. Nobody knew for sure, and she never clarified. What she did do was walk the neighborhood with a clipboard, a laser measuring tool, and a thin smile. She measured everything. Mailboxes, hedge heights, paint colors, boat lifts, even the height of the holiday wreath on the community welcome sign. It wasn't long before folks started whispering. Corliss was sharp, no doubt. Professional, polished, but cold. People said she once fined a neighbor for having wind chimes, another for an unapproved patio umbrella. She said it was about property value. She always said that. Royston didn't pay her much mind at first. He had work, contracts, soil studies to file. Besides, he figured she'd leave him be. His place sat on the edge of the lake, up the slope from most of the homes. He didn't throw parties, didn't blast music, just kept to himself and took care of the land. But Corliss noticed the bridge. Nobody knew when she first saw it, but it clearly bothered her. Some folks said she took a picture and sent it to the board with a subject line that read, "Unregulated structure, immediate action required." Royston never saw that email, but he felt its echo when the official notice came in the mail. Still, he didn't go to the next HOA meeting. Not because he was being stubborn, but because he'd been to enough of them over the years to know what they were about. Landscaping contracts, pool repairs, bake sale volunteers. He'd never heard of a single homeowner being targeted over a bridge that had been standing longer than the HOA had existed. But this was a different HOA now. At the next meeting, held in the Briarwood Community Hall, Corliss stood at the front wearing a cream blazer, reading glasses perched low on her nose. The PowerPoint behind her read, "Visual Cohesion and Safety Compliance, Phase 1. She talked about uniformity, liability, and future development potential. She used words like non-conforming construction, unauthorized private access structures, and viewline disruptions. Slide after slide of examples flashed by, mostly older homes, all marked with red X's. Then came a picture of Royston's bridge. Taken from a distance early in the morning, the wood looked dark and uneven. A big red X was stamped across it. A few residents shifted in their seats. One raised a hand to ask, "Wait, isn't that Royston Hale's bridge?" Corliss didn't blink. It doesn't meet code. It was not submitted for HOA review. It wasn't permitted through our architectural committee. It also obstructs visual consistency along the lakefront. "But it's his land, right?" the man asked again. "Briarwood Hills has easement rights that include visual regulation on all bordering lakefront properties," she replied, voice flat. "Page 43 of the bylaws." Nobody had read page 43. Most of them barely read past page 5. Someone else mumbled, "He's been here forever." Corliss smiled thinly. "Longevity does not equal compliance." The motion passed. 6-1. The one dissenting vote was a school teacher named Gloria Trenholm, who lived 2 doors down from Royston. She told a friend later that it felt wrong, like rewriting the rules after the game had already started. Royston didn't hear about the vote until a neighbor mentioned it in passing at the gas station. "They voted on your bridge," the man said, squinting. "HOA, at the meeting. Said it was out of code or something." Royston stared at him. "They voted without me?" The man shrugged. "I guess." Royston didn't say anything. He just paid for his coffee and left. That night, he stood on the bridge again. Wind moving over the water. A cricket chirped somewhere in the reeds. The bridge creaked slightly beneath him. Old, sure, but solid. Stronger than most things built today. He had no idea how far Corliss was willing to go. But by the time he found out, his bridge would be gone, and the respect he had for the HOA would go with it. It happened on a Thursday morning, just after 7 a.m. Royston had just sat down on the porch with a piece of toast and a black coffee, flipping through a copy of Alabama Land and Water Journal, when he heard the rumble of a truck engine, then another. Gravel crunched. Voices. Boots. A power saw. He set his coffee down and stood. From his porch, he had a clear view of the bridge, and what he saw made his chest tighten. 4 men in neon vests were already on site. One was swinging a sledgehammer into the bridge's railing. Another was stacking sections of lumber onto a flatbed trailer. A third man rolled out caution tape like they were securing a crime scene. No one looked up. No one knocked. No one asked. Royston stepped off his porch and walked down the sloped path with steady, deliberate steps. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He just asked, "Who gave you permission to touch that bridge?" The man with the sledgehammer paused, looking toward the one holding a clipboard. A younger guy, mid-30s maybe, nervous in the way of someone who knew he wasn't where he was supposed to be. "HOA sent us," he said. "We got orders. Work order from Briarwood Hills Association." Royston narrowed his eyes. "You have a copy of that order." The man fumbled with his clipboard and handed over a stapled packet. The top page had the HOA letterhead and a stamped line that read, "Emergency Compliance Enforcement, Visual Disruption Removal." Royston scanned it. Nowhere was his name. Nowhere was his signature. No certified mail. No hearing. No authorization from the city. "Did Corliss Pendry sign off on this?" The man nodded. "Yes, sir. She's the one who— Look, we're just here to follow the paperwork. If you have an issue, you'll have to take it up with the HOA board." Royston looked back at the bridge. A whole section of planks was already gone. His grandfather's hand-cut beams lay split and cracked in a pile like trash. One of the men was using a pry bar to loosen the main cross support. "You tell your boss she just made this personal," Royston said. The man didn't reply, just looked down and stepped back. Royston didn't try to stop them. He wasn't about to get arrested for assault or obstruction. He stood there, arms crossed, and watched them dismantle 70 years of history in less than an hour. By 9 a.m., the bridge was gone. Only the stone footings remained, half sunk into the mud and water. It looked like someone had amputated part of the land. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just turned and walked back to the house, went into the back room, and pulled down an old metal lockbox from the closet shelf. Inside, beneath property maps and a half-used checkbook, was a brown manila envelope. The deed. The original. He sat at the table and read it, line by line, just to remind himself it was still real. Then he pulled out his laptop, opened his email, and typed a message. To board@briarwoodhoa.org. Subject: Unauthorized destruction of private property. He laid it out clearly. The bridge was built in 1963, predating the HOA by 41 years. It was entirely on his land. He had not been given notice, due process, or an opportunity to respond. He attached photos, permits, a scanned copy of the deed showing uninterrupted ownership of the land, water access, and the private easement that gave his family control of the small dam upstream. Then he hit send. No response that day. None the next. On Monday, a form letter reply came from the HOA general inbox. "We regret any inconvenience. The structure in question was found in violation of community aesthetic standards and was subject to approved removal. Further concerns may be addressed at our next monthly meeting." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of his documents, no compensation, no mention of the history they'd bulldozed. Just a thin smile in the form of digital ink. Later that evening, Royston drove to the dam. He hadn't been up there in a while, but the lock was still where he left it, rusted but strong. The gate creaked when he pushed it open. He walked down the slope to the narrow concrete face and stood above the spillway, watching the slow push of water drift under the grate. His grandfather's signature was still on the original plat map hanging in a frame at the county office. Right next to it, a clause barely anyone noticed, giving the Hale family long-term control of water management for Parcel D, which included the dam, spillway, and water levels up to the tree line. Royston stared down at the water, calm as glass. He didn't believe in revenge, but he did believe in correction. But first, he would give them one more chance to fix what they broke, before nature took the matter into her own hands. Royston wasn't a man who acted out of emotion. He wasn't wired like that. If he had been, someone would have been limping away from the bridge that morning, but he'd been raised on discipline, on legacy, on thinking 5 steps ahead. So that's exactly what he did. The morning after he received that form letter reply, Royston took a drive down to the Jefferson County Recorder's office in Bessemer. He didn't call ahead, didn't check online, just showed up with a stack of papers, a thermos of coffee, and a calm expression that hid a slow-burning fury. The clerk at the front desk, a woman named Trina with reading glasses and an auburn lanyard, looked up as he approached. "I need to pull property records for Lot 28B in the Briarwood Hills overlay," he said. "You the owner?" "Yes, ma'am. Royston Hale. Been in the family since 1947. She nodded and motioned him toward the side counter. 10 minutes later, she came back with a dusty file, 3 inches thick. It had the original land survey, water control permits, a handwritten easement note from 1965, and a stamped approval from the County Water Division transferring management rights of the upstream dam to Charlemont Hale and his direct heirs. Royston made copies, highlighted the important sections, paid for certified duplicates. He left with a folder tucked under his arm and a decision settling into his bones like gravity. Back home, he didn't storm into a meeting or post on social media. He wrote a second email, this time directed to every single HOA board member individually. Each message was personalized. Each one had the documents attached. He made sure the language was sharp but professional, unshakable. Subject: legal notice regarding unauthorized bridge removal and valid water control rights. Immediate board review requested. He wrote, "You have made a significant error. The bridge you destroyed was fully within my property lines and predates the HOA's formation by 4 decades. Your action violates private property protections under both state law and local zoning ordinances. I am also the legal controller of the dam that feeds Lake Briar and am in possession of verified documentation granting me the right to manage water levels, flow, and maintenance without oversight from the HOA. I request a formal apology, restitution for damages, and written assurance of non-interference moving forward. You have 5 business days to respond before I consider escalation." He signed it, scanned the originals, and hit send. Then he waited. Day 1, nothing. Day 2, silence. On day 3, he received a single-line reply from Corliss Pendry herself. "Mr. Hale, we are currently reviewing the matter with legal counsel. We appreciate your patience." No apology, no retraction, no offer of a meeting. Royston exhaled and leaned back in his chair. He knew that tone. It was the corporate version of "stall him until it goes away." So he made one more move. He called someone he hadn't spoken to in years, Louis Trebain, a semi-retired attorney in Mobile who'd once helped Royston's cousin fight off an eminent domain claim. Louis picked up after the second ring. "Royston Hale," he said. "Been a long time." "Too long," Royston replied. "I need you to look at something." He emailed Louis the documents, the HOA notices, the photos of the demolished bridge. 2 hours later, Louis called back. "Royston, I don't say this often," he said, "but you've got them boxed in. That damn clause alone would take 5 lawyers 3 weeks to argue against. They didn't just make a mistake. They walked into a buzzsaw. I don't want to sue," Royston said quietly. "I want them to fix it." Louis paused. "You've given them that chance. They ignored it." "I know." He stared out the window at the empty stretch where the bridge used to be. It looked wrong, like a body with a missing limb, like something sacred had been disrespected. Louis's voice came through the line. "You know you could drain that lake legally, right? Make it real inconvenient for them." "I know," Royston repeated. "I'm just not there. Not yet." So he waited again. Gave it one more day. Friday morning came and went. No email, no visit, not even a letter. And that was the moment Royston Hale understood something simple and bitter. They thought he'd let it go. They'd decided he was harmless, that his land, his history, his rights, none of it mattered. But when people stop listening to reason, there's only one thing left that gets their attention, and Royston was finally ready to speak their language. The dam had always been there, tucked behind a row of loblolly pines and half swallowed by tall grass and rust-stained rock. Most folks in Briarwood Hills didn't even know it existed. It wasn't something you saw on walks or heard about at HOA barbecues. It was just a quiet structure on a quiet piece of land, forgotten, like most things that don't shine. But Royston never forgot. He'd visited that dam every year on the same day, his grandfather's birthday. He'd walk the edge, inspect the gate, clear debris from the spillway, and check the gauge readings by hand. His grandfather had done the same thing until his knees gave out. Then his father took over. And now it was Royston's job to keep the flow steady, the structure sound, and the lake healthy. What most people didn't realize was that Lake Briar wasn't natural. It was man-made, a reservoir created in 1938 by damming Cold Branch Creek to support small-scale farming and irrigation in Jefferson County. The surrounding land was auctioned off in parcels in the late 40s, when agriculture slowed and lakeside development began. That's when Charlemont Hale bought Parcel D, a piece of land that just happened to include control of the dam itself. That control came with conditions. The owner had to maintain the dam, keep water levels within county parameters, and document any changes. In return, they were granted complete discretion over water flow. No HOA oversight, no board involvement. It was all in writing. The clause was buried deep in the original grant deed. Paragraph 17, Section 8. Most attorneys missed it. Corliss Pendry definitely had. And Royston? He had the yellowing papers to prove it. He brought the full stack to Louis Trebain in Mobile that weekend. They laid everything out in the back office of a retired tax assessor's old farmhouse-turned-law space. Louis flipped through each page, nodding slowly, eyes narrowing behind wire-rimmed glasses. "You've got every right," he said, tapping the clause. "If you wanted to, you could drop the lake by 6 feet tomorrow and not break a single law. No injunction, no fines. They might file complaints, but they'd have no standing." Royston didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just leaned back in the chair, arms folded. "Then I want to do it right. No drama. No headlines. Just quiet correction." Louis raised an eyebrow. "You're going to drain the lake?" "I'm going to remind them what happens when you forget who holds the valve." Back in McCullough, Royston made the preparations himself. No crew, no noise, just methodical steps taken with precision and purpose. He took photos of the dam's current condition, logged the water level, noted the wildlife activity. He even double-checked the rainfall forecast for the next 10 days to avoid stressing the ecosystem downstream. On Sunday morning, just before dawn, he drove out to the dam with a thermos of coffee and a wrench set. The air was still. Mist skimmed the surface of the lake like a veil. A hawk circled high above the tree line. Royston crouched beside the release gate. It hadn't been opened more than a few inches in decades. Not since a spring flood back in '97, when runoff threatened the south bank. He loosened the main bolt, wiped away rust flakes, and turned the wheel slowly, steadily. The water answered. It didn't roar. It sighed. A smooth, controlled current began slipping through the spillway, sliding downstream like a quiet warning. Royston sat back on the concrete ledge and sipped his coffee. No anger. No noise, just gravity and paper doing what his voice couldn't. By noon, the lake had lowered 2 feet. By evening, 3 1/4. Birds flocked to the new mudflats. Boats began to lean. Docks dipped unevenly, and across the shoreline, homeowners who'd never met Royston began texting each other things like, "Is the lake shrinking?" and "Something wrong with the water?" Corliss Pendry didn't respond to any messages that night. Her phone, always glued to her hand, stayed dark. Royston didn't bother reaching out again. He'd spoken. Now it was time for them to listen. But by Monday morning, the silence would break, and the entire neighborhood would finally understand who really held the power in Briarwood Hills. Monday morning in Briarwood Hills usually came with dog walkers, joggers, the hum of sprinklers, and the occasional sound of lawnmowers sputtering back to life. But not that morning. Instead, it started with confusion. A paddleboarder named Jared, who always posted sunrise photos on Facebook, shared a blurry image of his board grounded in ankle-deep muck. The caption read, "Anyone else's water level dropped." Then someone from the eastern bank noticed their floating dock, was no longer floating. A fishing guide cancelled 3 bookings before 9 a.m. because his clients couldn't launch from the resort pier. By 10 unquack, the general manager at the Briarwood Retreat and Spa sent an urgent email to the HOA. Waterline is down nearly 4 feet. Guests are checking out early. Need answers immediately. Corliss Pendry was in her home office, meticulously color-coding her HOA presentation for next month, when her phone started buzzing. At first, she ignored it. She always did during administrative hours. But the third voicemail caught her attention. "Hey Corliss, it's Brett at Unit 12. Something's going on with the lake. My boat's stuck in the mud. Can you look into it?" She minimized her spreadsheet and opened the community forum. The headlines hit like bricks. "Entire South Bay is dry. WTH. Water receding fast. Fish gasping near shoreline. Bridge gone. Now this. Who's in charge?" Corliss clicked into the emergency HOA email thread. 8 new messages since breakfast. She felt her stomach twist when she read the message from the County Water Commission. It was short and devastating. "We've confirmed that the dam release gate at Parcel D was opened lawfully. Water flow recorded and logged. No violation found." She blinked. Parcel D. She knew the name. She just hadn't taken it seriously. Royston Hale. That soft-spoken man who lived in the old cabin at the edge of the lake, always wearing those mud-stained work boots and plaid shirts. The one who never came to meetings. She'd dismissed him. Flat out. Now he had drained their entire lake, and done it legally. Corliss stood up and stared out the window toward the lake. From her second-story view, she could see the distant brown line where the water once touched the rocks. The color contrast was glaring. Ugly. Her own dock now looked like a pier to nowhere. She called an emergency meeting for noon. Royston didn't show up. He wasn't invited. But he wasn't hiding either. He was home, sitting at his dining room table, a stack of documents fanned out in front of him, drinking his second cup of coffee. He'd woken up early again to check the dam. Everything was flowing exactly as planned. No flooding, no collapse, just a controlled, lawful release. And every bit of it was documented. He wasn't gloating. He didn't feel triumphant. If anything, he felt a kind of sad calm, like putting down a dog that had bitten one too many hands. Gloria Trenholm, the schoolteacher who'd been the only dissenting vote during the HOA's decision to remove the bridge, showed up around 1:30 that afternoon. She knocked gently and waited. Royston opened the door. She looked embarrassed to be standing there. "I just came to say, they're all freaking out," she said. "I don't blame you, Royston. I really don't." "What they did was out of line," he nodded, stepping aside to let her in. "I tried to warn them," he said, calm as ever. "I gave them the paper. I gave them time." "I know," she replied. "I said as much at the meeting. But Corliss, she just kept talking about property values." Royston gave a low laugh. "A bridge doesn't hurt property value. Ignoring history does." She stayed for 15 minutes. Asked if there was anything she could do. "You've done it already," he said. "You stood up when it counted." That night, the HOA forum lit up with theories. Some people thought Royston had gone too far. Others demanded the HOA reinstate the bridge or face a class action lawsuit from residents who'd lost bookings, rental income, or lakefront charm. And a few, just a few, started asking how a man could be pushed so far that draining an entire lake felt like the only option left. Corliss didn't sleep that night. She reread Royston's emails, looked at the county deed again. Every line, every signature. He hadn't broken a single rule. He had simply used the ones she ignored. But when the HOA called for a public confrontation, they were about to learn that Royston wasn't just defending his land, he was defending something they never understood: legacy. By Tuesday morning, Briarwood Hills wasn't just inconvenienced, it was in full-blown panic. The lake had dropped another 7 inches overnight. Fishing docks now tilted awkwardly. Jet skis rested in the mud like forgotten toys. And at the Briarwood Retreat and Spa, the maintenance crew was laying down plywood planks just so guests could get from the dining patio to the edge of what used to be the water. By mid-morning, The local news van from WBRC Fox 6 parked across from the clubhouse. A reporter stood in front of the drained lake, microphone in hand, while a drone hovered overhead. "We're here in McCalla, Alabama, where residents of Briarwood Hills woke up to a shocking sight. Lake Briar, nearly 4 feet lower than usual, and continuing to drop." Inside the HOA clubhouse, the mood was worse than tense. It was desperate. Corliss Pendry stood at the front of the conference room, pale but poised, her arms crossed as if she could physically hold the situation together. Around her, board members spoke over each other. "We have renters demanding refunds. Somebody said they found a catfish flopping in their yard this morning." "My dock's sitting in the mud, Corliss." She raised a hand, calling for quiet. "We're doing everything we can." "No." Someone snapped. It was Dale Kintner, the treasurer. "We're doing everything after the fact. You acted without a vote. You ordered that bridge removed without consulting legal. You escalated this." Corliss stiffened. It was a visual hazard, a non-compliant structure. And now we've got a $4 million resort on the verge of legal action because it's surrounded by empty shoreline. She paused, just for a second. Then someone opened the clubhouse door. It was Gloria Trenholm. "He's outside," she said. "Royston. He brought documents." The room went still. Outside, Royston stood beneath the overhang with a folder in his hand. No smile, no expression at all. Just the same calm presence he always carried, like he'd already considered every outcome and accepted them all. Corliss approached him first. "We're in the middle of a private meeting," she said, arms folded tight. Royston held up the folder. "This isn't for the meeting. It's for the record." Inside the folder was everything. His deed, the dam clause, the photos, his email timeline, even the county response verifying the legality of the release. Corliss took it without a word. Her fingers twitched when she saw the signature. Charlemont Hale, notarized, dated, sealed. "I gave you the chance to make this right," Royston said, his voice low. "You chose to ignore the law and disrespect a man's land. Now you're dealing with the consequences. You drained a lake." "No," he corrected. "I opened a gate that's mine to manage. The lake just responded." People were gathering behind her now. Residents, curious onlookers, the news team. Phones were out, recording. "You're hurting everyone," she said. "I'm correcting something," Royston replied. "Sometimes correction looks like damage to the ones who built on a lie." There was a long silence. Then a man in the crowd, someone Royston didn't recognize, spoke up. "Is it true the bridge was on his land the whole time?" Gloria answered, "Yes. He showed me the survey map. They tore it down without cause." Another voice. "Did the HOA even compensate him?" Corliss didn't answer. Royston didn't gloat. He didn't point fingers. He simply said, "I'll stop the drain if the HOA issues a formal apology, pays for damages, and agrees to a written non-interference clause going forward." Corliss looked stunned. "You're trying to extort the board." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm offering a solution. You're welcome to decline, but you're the one holding the empty lake." That was the last thing he said before walking back to his truck. Behind him, the crowd remained silent. For the first time since this began, nobody had anything to argue, because everyone knew what was really at stake wasn't the lake. It was the arrogance that led to its emptiness. But the moment Royston drove off, one board member whispered what the rest were already thinking. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The emergency HOA meeting that Wednesday night wasn't held in the clubhouse. Too many residents had questions. Too many cameras were now watching. So they moved it to the McCalla Community Center on Eastern Valley Road, where they could fit nearly 100 folding chairs, a long panel table, and, unfortunately for Corliss, an open mic. By 6:45 p.m., it was standing room only. Royston wasn't in the front row. He sat in the back corner, legs crossed, hat low, the same way he'd always sat in a courtroom during land disputes, quietly watching the people who talked too much. Corliss opened the meeting with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We appreciate everyone coming out tonight under difficult circumstances," she began, her voice carefully controlled. "We're here to address concerns about the ongoing water level issue at Lake Briar and the status of HOA responsibilities regarding property structures and—" A hand shot up. Then another. Then someone just stood up and spoke, cutting through the script. "I'd like to know who gave you the right to demolish someone's private bridge without notice." It was Mr. Bolland, a retired postal worker who had lived in Briarwood Hills for 28 years. Not exactly the loud type, but his voice was firm. Corliss hesitated. "That decision was made in accordance with the HOA Visual Standard Enforcement Guidelines." "You didn't consult legal," another woman said, rising from her chair. "You didn't even ask us to vote." "We were told it was unsafe," a younger man added. "But now it turns out it wasn't even yours to touch." The room shifted. Murmurs turned into outright questions. The tone changed fast. No more whispers, no more cautious side glances. Just open frustration. Royston remained in his seat, listening. Then Gloria stood up and turned toward the crowd. "Y'all know I voted against it," she said. "From the beginning, I told the board that bridge wasn't a hazard. It was heritage. And now the man who's kept this lake stable for decades, who owns the dam legally, I might add, has been disrespected on every level." Applause broke out. Not thunderous, but real. Corliss tried to steer the meeting back. "We understand emotions are high, but we're working toward a resolution." "You mean now that it's costing the community money?" said Dale, the treasurer. "The resort's pulling out of next year's contract. Real estate deals are on hold. Families are canceling weddings, all because of a power move you didn't think through." Corliss's voice got tight. "I acted with the intention of protecting long-term value." "But you didn't protect the people," someone yelled. "You protected your own preferences." And finally, slowly, Royston stood up. He didn't walk to the front. He didn't ask for a mic. He just spoke in that calm, even voice of his, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't drain that lake out of anger," he said. "I drained it because every legal avenue I had was ignored. Every message I sent was dismissed. Every piece of paper proving my rights was tossed aside like it didn't matter." The room fell quiet. "I didn't want to fight," he continued. "I wanted a conversation. They chose silence. So I showed them that silence has volume too." He pulled a manila envelope from under his arm and held it up. "This contains a written agreement. I'll return the lake to normal levels if the board signs off on 3 things: a public apology, compensation for damages to my bridge, and a legal document ensuring they will never interfere with my land again." He placed the envelope on the back table and sat down. Corliss looked shaken. For the first time, the room didn't erupt. It didn't explode. It just shifted. People looked at her differently now. Not like a leader, like a liability. A few hours later, the board voted. 5-2, in favor of Royston's conditions. Corliss didn't vote at all. She left before the paperwork was signed. The next day, she submitted her resignation by email, citing a misalignment between the board's vision and community response. Nobody asked her to reconsider. But as Royston returned to the dam that weekend, ready to close the gate and let the water rise again, he carried no pride in his walk, just the quiet weight of what it takes to defend something when no one else will. By the following week, the lake was rising again, slowly, deliberately. Royston hadn't rushed it. He adjusted the gate a quarter turn each morning, allowing the water to creep back in at a pace the land could absorb. No flooding, no sudden shocks to the ecosystem. The birds returned first, egrets, mallards, and a lone great blue heron that landed near the old stone footing where Royston's bridge once stood. Residents came by in small groups. Some just stood and watched, hands in their pockets, murmuring quiet thanks. A few came up to Royston directly. One man, Jude Ellaby, retired military, lived on the western slope, shook his hand without saying a word, just a nod and a firm grip. It said more than most apologies could. A teenage girl, maybe 15, approached with her mother. She had drawn a picture of the bridge, what it used to look like, colored in pencil, with Royston standing beside it. "I never got to walk across it," she said softly. "But my mom told me how your grandfather built it. I think that's cool." Royston looked down at the picture, lips pressed together. He thanked her, then walked it straight to the inside wall of his tool shed and pinned it up where the bridge used to end. As the days passed, the tone of the neighborhood changed. Conversations that had once been about paint codes and lawn heights shifted. People started bringing up things like respect, legacy, and how quickly power can get out of hand when no one checks it. Some still whispered about that man who drained the lake, usually followed by some variation of he went too far. But even those voices got quieter when others started replying, maybe if someone had just listened to him, the bridge would still be there. The Briarwood Retreat and Spa issued a statement thanking the community for restoring Lake Briar's natural charm. They never mentioned Royston by name, but they quietly renewed their lease agreement for the next 3 years, at a reduced rate due to the incident. As for Corliss Pendry, she left McCalla altogether. Moved to Charleston, according to local gossip. She never responded to the board's follow-up emails. Didn't come back to pack her things herself, just sent a moving crew. A few residents noticed she left behind the oversized flower planters she'd once insisted were required for symmetry. Royston never spoke about her publicly. Not once. Not even when reporters from a regional paper tried to get him on record. He simply said, "I'm not interested in shame. I'm interested in peace." The new HOA president, a retired engineer named Alvin Roebuck, reached out personally. Came by Royston's property with coffee and a pen. "We reviewed the old bylaws," he said. "You were right. About all of it." Royston didn't gloat. He just held out the folder with the agreement. "You sign this, and I'll never bring it up again." Alvin read it, nodded, and signed on the tailgate of Royston's truck. The agreement was simple. No future action by the HOA could alter or interfere with any structure on Royston's land without a formal vote and a 2/3 majority approval, with legal review. The dam rights were reaffirmed. The bridge's destruction was acknowledged as unauthorized, and a formal apology was recorded in the board's official meeting minutes. That was enough for Royston. He used the funds from the compensation to begin rebuilding the bridge, this time not alone. One Saturday morning, 8 neighbors showed up without being asked. They brought lumber, tools, coffee, even one man's teenage son who had never held a hammer before. Royston handed him a plank and said, "Every beam has a place, just like every person. You just gotta find it." The new bridge wasn't an exact replica. It was wider, had railings, and bore a carved plaque at the center post. In honor of Charlemont Hale, 1912 to 1985. He built bridges before they were fashionable. Somebody suggested they rename it Hale's Crossing. Royston smiled. "That's fine. Just don't let anyone put a gate on it." But even as life around the lake returned to normal, the people of Briarwood Hills would never forget the week their water vanished, and the man who reminded them that land has memory, and some fences should never be built in the first place. Months later, Lake Briar looked like it had never dropped a single inch. Ducks glided across the surface at dusk. Kids paddled in kayaks again. Wedding photographers set up tripods along the shore, chasing golden hour. And the bridge, Hale's Crossing, stood clean and strong, a mix of old memory and new effort, stitched together by something deeper than wood. Respect. Royston didn't talk about what happened much. He still kept to himself most days, still wore the same boots, still walked the shoreline in the early morning with his thermos, inspecting the waterline like his grandfather once did. But people waved more now. Strangers stopped their cars to ask him about native grasses and erosion control. One man even brought his teenage daughter to meet him, just to shake the hand of the guy who drained the lake and made the HOA blink. Royston would chuckle, but he never told the story like a man who won something. Because for him, it was never about winning. It was about not letting history disappear quietly. And for those who paid attention, that was the real lesson. It wasn't about a bridge, or a lake, or a title stamped on paper. It was about what happens when people confuse authority with wisdom, when they believe paperwork gives them the right to erase the past in the name of uniformity. Royston had watched it happen before. Small things first. Shrubs removed, names scrubbed from community directories. Then suddenly, entire histories bulldozed under false pretenses. The bridge was his line in the dirt, and when they crossed it, when they destroyed it without conversation, without apology, he didn't raise his voice. He opened a gate. He didn't tear down their homes. He didn't take revenge. He just reminded them that ignoring the foundation of something doesn't make it disappear. It just makes everything built on top of it weaker. In the end, the lake came back. But something had shifted. The HOA updated their bylaws. They added a clause about reviewing historic structures and seeking community input before enacting removal. They even created a legacy land committee aimed at preserving long-standing elements of the neighborhood's character. Royston didn't join it. He didn't need to. The point had been made, and every time someone crossed Hale's Crossing, they crossed over a piece of what he'd fought to protect. Gloria Trenholm gave him a photo once, taken from a drone, showing the new bridge in full. At the bottom, she wrote in cursive, "You didn't just hold the line. You taught us where it was." He framed it and hung it above his workbench. One evening, as the sun melted low over the water, Royston sat on the new bridge, feet dangling off the edge, coffee in hand. A boy on a bike rode by, slowed down and called out, "Hey, Mr. Hale, my dad says you're the reason we can fish here again." Royston smiled, raised his cup and replied, "Tell your dad he's the reason it matters." The boy nodded and pedaled off, tires crunching gravel. That was all he needed. No trophy, no title, just the quiet return of balance. And maybe that's what we're meant to take from Royston's story. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stand still when the world tells them to move. Sometimes fighting back doesn't require anger, just truth. And sometimes protecting a memory is more important than protecting a rule book. So when someone tells you to tear down something that matters, when they dismiss your voice, your story, your roots, don't yell. Show them what happens when you open the dam. Let the water speak. If you believe history matters, if you've ever fought to hold on to something others didn't understand, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and hit subscribe for more powerful stories like this one.